On the morning of the 8th of January 1943, French customs inspector Henri Lafont walked into his office at the port of Marseille to discover that overnight someone had stolen 847 kilograms of coffee beans from a locked government warehouse. The locks were intact. The guards reported nothing unusual. The coffee had simply vanished. What Lafont didn't know was that he'd just encountered one of thousands of operations in a vast underground economy that would move an estimated 184 billion francs worth of goods across occupied Europe between 1940 and 1945. This parallel economy didn't just feed hungry civilians. It financed resistance networks, enriched collaborators, and in some cases, kept entire nations functioning when official channels had collapsed. The story of wartime black markets reveals a hidden dimension of the Second World War, where the lines between patriot and profiteer, survival and crime, resistance fighter and gangster, became impossibly blurred. The system that created these black markets began with strict wartime rationing programs implemented across Europe starting in 1939. In Britain, the Ministry of Food introduced rationing on the 8th of January 1940, limiting each person to 4 ounces of bacon, 4 ounces of butter, and 12 ounces of sugar per week. France followed with even more severe restrictions after the German occupation in June 1940. By 1942, the average Parisian was allocated just 1,200 calories per day through official rations, roughly half what a healthy adult requires. In Germany itself, the Reich food estate under Herbert Backe controlled every aspect of food distribution, setting prices and quantities with bureaucratic precision. Meanwhile, the German occupation authorities systematically stripped occupied territories of resources. Wehrmacht Quartermaster General Eduard Wagner oversaw the requisition of approximately 60% of French agricultural production for German use. The official economy simply couldn't sustain civilian populations under these conditions. Something had to give. The black market emerged not as a criminal conspiracy, but as an organic response to impossible circumstances. By late 1940, parallel markets existed in every occupied country and most combatant nations. In Paris, the Marché aux Puces flea markets became de facto black market bazaars, where anything could be purchased at the right price. A kilogram of butter that officially cost 18 francs sold for 180 francs on the black market by 1943. Coffee, unavailable through official channels, reached 400 francs per kilogram. In Brussels, the black market was so pervasive that the German military administration estimated 80% of the Belgian population engaged in illegal trade, at least occasionally. Even in Germany, where penalties were severe, black market activity flourished. Gestapo reports from Munich in 1943 complained that criminal elements and even respectable citizens were trading rationed goods openly. The scale was staggering. French authorities estimated that by 1944, the black market handled more transactions than the official economy. What began as individual survival quickly evolved into sophisticated commercial networks. In France, organized crime groups that had operated before the war adapted rapidly to the new reality. The Carling, a group of French gangsters who became collaborators and Gestapo auxiliaries, controlled much of the black market in Paris. Led by Pierre Bonny, a former police inspector, and Henri Lafont, whose name the customs inspector coincidentally shared, the Carling operated from their headquarters at 93 Rue Lauriston in the 16th arrondissement. They had Gestapo authorization to move goods freely, which they exploited ruthlessly. Meanwhile, they tortured resistance members in the same building where they stored black market butter and coffee. The contradiction was perfect and terrible. In Marseille, the Corsican crime families of the French Connection, later famous for heroin smuggling, cut their teeth moving rationed goods during the war. Paul Carbone and François Spirito commanded networks that stretched from Marseille to Lyon. moving everything from olive oil to tobacco. The logistics of black market operations required ingenuity that would have impressed any military quartermaster. Smugglers developed elaborate systems to move goods past checkpoints and across borders. In the Netherlands, resistance member Gerrit Jan van Heuven Goedhart organized a network that smuggled food from rural areas into starving cities during the hunger winter of 1944 to 1945. His couriers, often women and children less likely to be searched thoroughly, carried supplies in specially designed clothing with hidden pockets. One courier could carry 8 kilograms of butter strapped to her body beneath a heavy coat. The network moved an estimated 12,000 kilograms of food per week at its peak. In Norway, fishermen smuggled goods across the Skagerrak Strait to neutral Sweden in small boats, navigating German patrols and naval minefields. The distance was only 95 miles, but the journey took 14 to 18 hours in rough seas. They returned with medical supplies and communications equipment for the resistance. What resistance groups quickly realized was that the black market offered more than just survival for civilians. It provided a crucial source of financing for underground operations. The French resistance network Combat, led by Henri Frenay, partially funded its activities through controlled black market operations in Lyon and surrounding areas. They would purchase goods at official prices using forged ration cards, then sell them at black market rates. The profit financed printing presses for underground newspapers, safe houses, and weapons purchases. The economics were compelling. A resistance cell that could secure 100 kilograms of coffee, bought officially at 35 francs per kilogram, and sold at black market rates, could generate 36,500 francs in profit, enough to fund a month of operations for a substantial network. The Polish Home Army employed similar tactics in Warsaw, operating what they called expropriation units that seized goods from German supply depots and sold them on the black market to fund resistance activities. The German occupation authorities faced a fundamental paradox. They depended on local police and administrators to enforce rationing and suppress black markets, but those same officials were often participants in illegal trade. In France, the Vichy government created the Service du Contrôle Économique, with 3,200 inspectors tasked with suppressing black markets. Yet, investigations after liberation revealed that dozens of these inspectors had taken bribes or participated directly in smuggling. The bribes were substantial. A single payment to look the other way during a shipment could equal 6 months of an inspector's official salary. Meanwhile, German military personnel themselves engaged in systematic black market activity. Soldiers stationed in France regularly sent packages of rationed goods back to Germany, circumventing official channels. Some Wehrmacht supply sergeants operated elaborate schemes, falsifying records to divert supplies for black market sale. What made prosecution difficult was that many German officers regarded such activity as legitimate acquisition of resources for the Reich. The mechanics of a major smuggling operation reveal the complexity of wartime underground commerce. Consider the butter trade between Normandy and Paris in 1943, documented in detail by French police reports. Farmers in the Calvados region produced butter that officially belonged to the German requisition system. Working with local resistance networks, they would report lower production figures, hiding the excess. The butter was packed in small wooden crates, 8 kilograms per crate, and loaded onto trucks disguised as legitimate transport vehicles. The trucks traveled 120 miles to Paris, passing through at least 3 German checkpoints. At each checkpoint, drivers presented forged transportation permits created by resistance members who had infiltrated the Vichy bureaucracy. The permits bore genuine official stamps stolen from government offices. In Paris, the butter was distributed through a network of grocers who sold it at black market prices. The proceeds were split 3 ways: 1/3 to the farmers, 1/3 to the transport network, and 1/3 to the resistance. A single successful run could generate 45,000 francs in profit. The network operated twice weekly for 14 months, before German counterintelligence broke it up in March 1944. The British black market, though smaller than its continental counterparts, revealed different dynamics in a nation not under occupation. The Ministry of Food estimated that 114,000 tons of food, roughly 5% of total supply, passed through black market channels in 1944. Much of this involved what the British called spives, small-time operators who dealt in stolen ration coupons, forged permits, and diverted goods. Some items became particularly valuable. Nylon stockings, unavailable through official channels after American supplies, were diverted to military parachute production, sold for 5 times their pre-war price. Fresh eggs commanded premium prices, leading to a thriving trade in rural areas where enforcement was minimal. The penalties were theoretically severe. The defense regulations allowed for imprisonment up to 14 years for serious black market offenses. In practice, most offenders received fines. Of 87,500 prosecutions for black market violations in Britain between 1940 and 1945, only 890 resulted in prison sentences exceeding 1 year. In Eastern Europe, black markets took on additional dimensions, shaped by both German occupation and Soviet partisan activity. In Warsaw, before the uprising of August 1944, approximately 80% of the Jewish ghetto's food supply came through smuggling. Children as young as 8 squeezed through gaps in the ghetto walls, emerging in the Aryan section to purchase food with money or valuables, then smuggling it back. The German penalty for Jews caught outside the ghetto was death, and for Poles helping them, also death. Yet the trade continued because the alternative was starvation. Adam Cherniakov, chairman of the Warsaw Judenrat, recorded in his diary on the 4th of May, 1941, that official rations provided 184 calories per day per person. The smuggling networks provided perhaps another 800 calories. Even this was barely enough. In the occupied Soviet Union, partisan groups financed operations through black market trade in a different way. They would raid German supply columns, seizing goods, then trade these supplies with local peasants for food, intelligence, and recruits. The 1st Belarusian Partisan Brigade, under Vasily Korj, operated what was essentially a mobile trading network across a territory covering 3,200 square kilometers. The Italian black market exploded after Italy's surrender in September 1943. With the country split between German occupation in the north and Allied control in the south, and official governance structures collapsed, black markets became the primary economy. In Rome, during the German occupation from September 1943 to June 1944, the black market centered on the Campo dei Fiori marketplace. Here, anything could be purchased: food, forged documents, weapons, information, even safe passage through German lines. Prices fluctuated wildly based on military fortunes. After the Allied landing at Anzio on the 22nd of January 1944, prices for southern Italian goods dropped by 30% in Rome as traders anticipated liberation. Resistance groups in Rome, coordinated through the GAP, Gruppi di Azione Patriottica, used black market profits to fund operations. One particularly audacious operation involved resistance members posing as German supply officers and requisitioning an entire warehouse of goods, which they then sold on the black market. The operation generated 890,000 lire, funding the Japs' activities in Rome for 3 months. The role of women in wartime black markets deserves particular attention, as official histories often overlook it. Women comprised an estimated 65% of black market participants in France, according to police records. This reflected both necessity and opportunity. Women were responsible for feeding families with inadequate official rations. They also aroused less suspicion at checkpoints, and German soldiers were less likely to conduct thorough searches of women. Marie-Madeleine Fourcade, leader of the Alliance Resistance Network, later recalled that her female agents regularly smuggled documents, money, and small valuable items in their undergarments, knowing German soldiers rarely searched women thoroughly. In Belgium, André de Jong, who organized the Comet Line escape network for Allied airmen, financed operations partially through black market currency exchange. She would purchase Belgian francs at official rates, using money provided by British intelligence, then exchange them on the black market for French francs at much better rates, generating profit that funded safe houses and forged documents. What complicated the moral landscape was that not all black market activity served noble purposes. Collaboration and resistance sometimes intersected in the same transactions. In France, certain black marketeers sold to both German forces and resistance networks, motivated purely by profit. The Shkolnikov gang, a group of Jewish smugglers operating in Paris, traded with whoever paid best. When the Gestapo arrested them in October 1943, investigators found records showing sales to German officers, Vichy officials, and resistance groups. The gang's only loyalty was to profit. This created complex situations where resistance groups might unknowingly finance collaborators, or where collaborators might inadvertently supply resistance operations. The archives of the French Ministry of Interior contain hundreds of cases where post-war investigations couldn't clearly determine whether individuals were patriots, criminals, or something in between. The German response to black markets evolved as the war progressed, and Germany's position deteriorated. Initially, occupation authorities treated black market activity as primarily an economic crime, enforcing penalties through local police and courts. As partisan activity increased and the connection between black markets and resistance became clear, the SS and Gestapo took control of enforcement. In France, the Sicherheitsdienst, the SS intelligence service, created specialized units to combat black markets. Sturmbannführer Klaus Barbie, commanding Gestapo operations in Lyon from November 1942, made breaking black market networks a priority, correctly identifying them as resistance funding sources. His interrogation methods were savage. When his men arrested members of a black market ring in April 1943, Barbie personally tortured them to extract information about resistance connections. 8 of the 14 arrested died during interrogation. In Poland, the penalty for black market activity by Jews was immediate execution, and for Poles, imprisonment or forced labor in Germany. Yet even these draconian measures failed to suppress the trade. The technical aspects of forgery became central to black market operations. Ration coupons, transportation permits, identification papers, and official stamps were the currency of illegal trade. Resistance groups established sophisticated forgery operations to supply black market networks. In the Netherlands, the LO, Landelijke Organisatie voor Hulp aan Onderduikers, operated a central forgery office in Utrecht that produced an estimated 300,000 forged documents between 1943 and 1945. The forgers, many of them professional printers conscripted into resistance work, achieved remarkable quality. They used genuine paper stock stolen from government supplies, authentic inks obtained through bribery of clerks, and carefully copied official stamps. The going rate for a forged identity card was 150 guilders, a complete set of documents allowing someone to pose as a traveling salesman with permits to move freely and purchase goods, cost 850 guilders. The investment paid off quickly for serious black market operators. As Allied forces liberated occupied territories, the black market's character shifted but didn't disappear. In France, after liberation in the summer of 1944, black markets initially intensified as official supply systems remained disrupted. American cigarettes became the ultimate currency. a pack of Lucky Strikes that cost an American soldier 50 cents in the paillettes sold for 400 francs on the black market, roughly $8 at official exchange rates. American soldiers became major black market participants. The U.S. Army's Criminal Investigation Division estimated that 10% of supplies destined for American forces in Europe were diverted to black markets. Some diversions were small-scale, individual soldiers selling cigarettes and chocolate. Others involved entire truckloads of supplies stolen by organized rings. In March 1945, military police broke up a ring operating in Paris that had stolen and sold 47 tons of supplies over 6 months. The ringleader was a supply sergeant from the 28th Infantry Division who had made an estimated $680,000 from the operation. In Germany itself, as the Reich collapsed, black markets became the dominant economy. By early 1945, the official economy had essentially ceased functioning in many areas. In Berlin, a pack of cigarettes bought more than a week's official wages. Coffee was worth its weight in gold, literally. Desperate Germans traded family heirlooms, artwork, and jewelry for food. American soldiers discovered that a chocolate bar or pack of cigarettes could purchase valuable goods or services. The moral complications were profound. Was a starving German mother trading a valuable painting for food to feed her children a criminal or a victim? Were Allied soldiers who accepted such trades exploiting defeated enemies or participating in a market that distributed resources more efficiently than the collapsed official system? The answers weren't clear. The economics of black markets revealed fundamental truths about wartime conditions. Official prices bore no relationship to actual scarcity or value. A kilogram of butter officially cost 18 francs in France throughout the occupation, even as production dropped by 60% and demand remained constant. The black market price, which reached 180 francs by 1943, more accurately reflected reality. This created perverse incentives. Farmers had no reason to sell at official prices when black market prices were 10 times higher. Government efforts to enforce official prices simply drove more activity underground. Some economists later argued that black markets, despite their illegality, actually improved resource allocation by directing goods to those who valued them most and could pay the most. This analysis ignored that ability to pay often reflected pre-war wealth rather than need, and that black markets excluded the poorest civilians who suffered most severely under rationing. The relationship between occupiers and occupied populations played out in complex ways through black market transactions. German soldiers and officials who participated in black markets implicitly acknowledged the exploitation of occupied populations. By purchasing black market goods, they competed with local civilians for scarce resources, driving prices higher. Yet many German soldiers rationalized this as legitimate activity, no different from purchasing goods at market rates. Some developed genuine relationships with black market suppliers. The memoirs of Hans von Luck, commander of the 21st Panzer Division's 125th Panzer Grenadier Regiment, describe how his men regularly purchased black market wine and food from French suppliers in Normandy before D-Day. Von Luck claimed these transactions were mutually beneficial, with French farmers receiving good prices and German soldiers improving their rations. The French suppliers might have characterized the relationship differently. What happened to the major black market networks after liberation revealed the ambiguity of their wartime role. In France, the provisional government under Charles de Gaulle faced a dilemma. Many black marketeers had resistance connections and claimed they had served the nation. Others were obvious profiteers who had exploited national suffering. The purge trials, the epuration, struggled with these distinctions. Pierre Bonny and Henri Lafont of the Carlingue were executed on the 27th of December, 1944, but their crimes were collaboration and torture, not black market activity. Many other black market operators were never prosecuted. Some became legitimate businessmen in post-war France. their wartime activities quietly forgotten. The Corsican smugglers of Marseille transitioned seamlessly into post-war criminal enterprises, notably the French connection heroin trade that flourished in the 1950s and 1960s. In Belgium and the Netherlands, similar patterns emerged. Some black marketeers were prosecuted, but most simply melted back into legal commerce as official rationing ended and normal markets resumed. The resistance groups that had used black market profits faced their own reckoning. Could they claim moral superiority while having enriched themselves through illegal trade? Most resistance members argued that circumstances had forced impossible choices, and that black market profits had served the greater good of defeating occupation. The archives support this to a degree. Documented cases show resistance networks using black market funds for weapons purchases, printing underground newspapers, supporting families of arrested members, and maintaining safe houses. Yet the accounting was imperfect. Some resistance members undoubtedly diverted funds for personal use. The line between resistance operations and criminal enterprise was not always clear. What is clear is that without black market financing, many resistance networks would have been unable to sustain operations. British Special Operations Executive reports from France estimated that black market activities provided 35 to 40% of resistance funding, with the remainder coming from Allied parachute drops and expropriation of German assets. The human cost of black market enforcement rarely appears in official histories, but it was substantial. German and collaborationist authorities executed thousands of black market participants across occupied Europe. In France alone, German military courts sentenced at least 2,400 people to death for economic crimes, including black market activity between 1940 and 1944. Not all sentences were carried out, but executions numbered in the hundreds. In Poland, the numbers were higher. The Germans executed an estimated 5,000 Poles for economic crimes during the occupation, with black market activity being a common charge. Many executions were public, intended as deterrents. On the 17th of March 1943, German authorities in Warsaw publicly hanged 11 Poles accused of black market trading in the former Ghetto area. The bodies were left hanging for 3 days. The deterrent effect was minimal. Black market trading continued at the same location within days. The technical sophistication of major smuggling operations continued to evolve throughout the war. By 1944, some networks employed tactics that anticipated modern organized crime. The Route de la Soie, Silk Road network, operated between Lyon and the Swiss border, moving high-value goods including jewelry, gold, and watches. The network employed scouts who identified German patrol patterns, bribed customs officials on both sides of the border, used coded radio communications to coordinate movements, and maintained safe houses every 15 kilometers along their routes. The couriers traveled at night, guided by local farmers who knew the terrain. They carried no documents linking them to their sponsors. If caught, they claimed to be individual smugglers acting alone. The network moved an estimated 40 million francs worth of goods between July 1943 and August 1944, before liberation made it obsolete. Its organizers later claimed they had passed 15% of profits to resistance networks, though this claim couldn't be independently verified. The relationship between black markets and the official economy became increasingly parasitic as the war progressed. Black markets depended on the official economy for their existence. Rationing created artificial scarcity that generated black market premiums. Official prices provided a baseline that made black market prices meaningful. Forged documents derived value from genuine documents they mimicked. Yet black markets undermined the official economy by diverting goods, corrupting officials, and demonstrating the irrelevance of official prices. By 1944 in France, government economists estimated the black market had grown so large It threatened to collapse what remained of the official system. The francs' value was sustained more by black market demand than by government policy. This created a bizarre situation where the government depended on the black market it was trying to suppress. The final months of war brought particularly intense black market activity as populations anticipated liberation or defeat. In the Netherlands during the Hunger Winter from November 1944 to May 1945, black markets became the difference between survival and starvation for hundreds of thousands. The German authorities had imposed a transport embargo on the Western Netherlands in retaliation for a railway strike, cutting off food supplies. Official rations dropped to 580 calories per day. Black market prices soared. A kilogram of butter reached 350 guilders, compared to the official price of $2.90. Tulip bulbs, normally inedible, were eaten after processing. Resistant smuggling networks brought food from the rural eastern provinces, but volumes were insufficient. An estimated 18,000 Dutch civilians died from starvation and related causes during this period. The black market saved many lives, but couldn't save everyone. In Germany, during the final collapse, black markets reached absurd extremes. As the Reichsmark became worthless, barter systems dominated. Cigarettes became the de facto currency. American cigarettes were preferred, but any cigarettes had value. A single cigarette could purchase a cup of coffee. A carton could purchase a week's food. German civilians looted abandoned military supplies, then traded them on black markets. In the ruins of Berlin in May 1945, open-air markets operated where anything could be traded: military weapons, jewelry, furniture salvaged from bombed buildings, forged documents, information about missing persons. Soviet soldiers were eager participants, trading looted goods and military supplies for watches, which they particularly prized. The scene was chaotic and desperate, a market emerging from civilization's collapse. The post-war occupation government struggled to suppress black markets while official rationing continued. In Germany, the Allied Control Council maintained rationing until 1948. Black markets continued to flourish. The American and British occupation authorities estimated that 35% of economic activity in their zones occurred through illegal channels in 1946. The currency reform of June 1948, which introduced the Deutsche Mark and ended most rationing, finally killed the German black market by restoring a functioning official economy. Similar patterns occurred in other liberated countries. As official economies recovered and rationing ended, black markets withered naturally. They had been symptoms of economic disruption rather than criminal conspiracies. The legacy of wartime black markets shaped post-war European societies in ways that remained visible for decades. Many fortunes made during the war through black market activity became the foundation for legitimate post-war businesses. The distinction between old money, new money, and black market money was carefully maintained in polite society, but increasingly irrelevant in practice. The experience of participating in illegal markets normalized a certain level of economic rule-breaking that persisted into the post-war era. Tax evasion, informal employment, and under-the-table transactions were more prevalent in countries with extensive wartime black markets. Whether this represented a permanent cultural shift or simply the lingering effects of wartime conditions remained debated among sociologists for decades. What the story of wartime black markets reveals most clearly is the inadequacy of simple moral categories in understanding occupied Europe. The resistance fighter who smuggled coffee was also technically a criminal. The French farmer who hid production from German requisitions to sell on the black market was simultaneously a small-scale profiteer and a saboteur of the occupation. The customs inspector who accepted a bribe to let a shipment through might have done so to feed his family, or to help the resistance, or simply for greed, possibly all three. The German soldier who purchased black market wine was participating in the exploitation of occupied populations, but also engaging in voluntary trade with willing sellers. None of these actors fit neatly into categories of hero or villain. They were people navigating impossible circumstances, making choices that mix survival, profit, principle, and compromise in ways that defy simple judgment. The black markets were not separate from the war's larger moral drama. They were part of it, revealing how ordinary people respond when normal rules collapse and survival demands improvisation. The butter that vanished from Henri Lafont's warehouse in Marseille on that January morning in 1943 probably fed hungry Parisians, enriched smugglers, and financed resistance operations all at once. That complexity is the truth of wartime black markets.